No one understood the Russian customer until the waitress replied in Russian and left everyone shocked. The buzz in Savannah's finest stopped abruptly when an elegant, silver-haired lady burst into the main dining room, speaking incomprehensible words in a language no one could identify. Her hands trembled as she gestured desperately, and tears streamed down her well-defined face, contrasting with the impeccable yellow blazer she wore. Emily Turner, only 23 years old, immediately put down the tray she was carrying upon hearing those familiar words, echoing through the finest restaurant in New York City. Her breathing quickened when she recognized the Siberian dialect she hadn't heard in over 15 years. "Can't anyone help me? My grandson, he's missing!" the lady shouted, ignoring the bewildered stares of the other customers who had interrupted their meals. Emily felt her blood run cold. Those words carried a desperation she knew all too well. Without a second thought, she approached the woman and replied in the same language, "Please, calm down, I understand you. What happened?" The silence that followed was deafening. Every person present at Savannah's finest turned to stare at the young waitress who had just demonstrated an impressive fluency in Russian. Forks stopped in midair, conversations ceased, and even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen seemed to fade. The Russian lady visibly paled, her blue eyes widening as if she had seen a ghost. She studied Emily's face with a disturbing intensity, like someone searching for something specific in every feature. "How do you know our dialect?" the woman whispered, her voice trembling. That's the dialect from my home village." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She had prepared for this moment for years, but never imagined it would happen like this, in front of so many people, in the place where she had worked for 2 years trying to rebuild her life. "I learned it in university," she lied quickly, forcing a professional smile. "I studied Slavic languages. Please tell me what happened to your grandson." The restaurant manager, Michael Thompson, approached nervously, clearly bothered by the scene unfolding in his establishment. The other staff members whispered among themselves, still in shock from the unexpected revelation about Emily. "Ma'am," Michael said politely, "perhaps it would be better to talk in a more private location." But the Russian woman completely ignored his suggestion, keeping her eyes fixed on Emily. There was something in her gaze that went beyond curiosity. It was recognition and fear. "What is your full name?" she asked in Russian, her voice now carrying an authority she hadn't shown before. "Emily Turner," the young woman replied, trying to stay calm, though she felt she was walking on dangerous ground. "Your Russian name? What was your Russian name?" the lady insisted, taking a step forward. Emily swallowed hard. This was a question she was not prepared to answer, at least not in that way. "I don't understand what you mean," she said, trying to steer the conversation back to the original problem. "You mentioned your grandson disappeared. Where were you when it happened?" But the woman didn't give up. Her eyes scanned every detail of Emily's face, as if memorizing each feature. Then, something seemed to click in her mind. "Emily," she murmured, almost inaudibly. "No, that's impossible." Emily felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. That name. How long had it been since she'd heard it? The name that Grandma Margaret used to whisper when she brushed her hair before bed in the small apartment in Queens where they had lived in hiding for so many years. "My name is Emily," she repeated, but her voice came out weaker than she intended. The tension in the air was palpable. The other customers continued to watch the scene with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Some began to pick up their phones, probably to record the unusual moment. Michael Thompson realized the situation was getting out of control and decided to intervene more forcefully. "Ladies, I'm going to have to ask you to continue this conversation in private. We have other customers to attend to." It was then that a tall, elegant man, wearing an impeccable navy blue suit, entered the restaurant. His eyes quickly scanned the room until they located the scene unfolding in the center of the dining hall. His expression changed from confusion to concern in a matter of seconds. "Mom," he called out in English, with a slight foreign accent. "I found you. I was looking everywhere." The Russian woman turned to him, but did not take her eyes off Emily Turner. "Richard, you won't believe what I discovered," she said in Russian, her voice trembling with emotion. "This girl, she speaks our dialect, the exact dialect from our village." Richard approached, studying Emily with the same investigative look as his mother. There was something in his eyes that made her feel like a museum piece being analyzed. "It's impossible," he said, also in Russian. "You must be mistaken, mother." "I am not mistaken about anything," the woman retorted vehemently. "She even looks like—" She stopped abruptly, as if she had said more than she intended. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now, continuing. Emily felt she was losing control of the situation. Every word spoken by those people took her back to memories she had tried to bury years ago. Memories of a time when her life was completely different, when she had another name, another identity. "If you'll excuse me," said Emily, trying to step away, "I need to get back to work." "Wait," the woman shouted, reaching out her hand to hold her. "Please, just tell me. Where did you learn that specific dialect? It's not something they teach in American universities." Emily stopped, knowing she couldn't avoid this conversation forever, but she also knew she couldn't reveal the truth. Not there, not in that way, and certainly not to these people who seemed to know more about her past than she was comfortable admitting. "It was with a private tutor," she quickly invented. "A Russian lady I met when I was a child." The woman's eyes lit up dangerously. "What was her name?" Emily hesitated. She knew that any name she said could be a trap, but she also realized these people wouldn't give up easily. "Margaret," she finally said, hoping the common name wouldn't arouse specific suspicions. What happened next was something Emily could never have predicted. The Russian woman staggered back, as if she had been punched in the stomach. Richard had to hold her to prevent her from falling. "Margaret Johnson," whispered the woman, her voice almost inaudible. Emily felt the world spinning around her. How did this woman know Grandma Margaret's full name? How was it possible? I don't know her last name." She lied desperately, but she knew her expression had given her away. "My God," murmured Richard, also in a state of shock. "Mother, this can't be a coincidence." The Russian woman, who Emily now realized was about 70 years old, straightened up slowly, her eyes fixed on the young woman with an intensity that made Emily feel completely exposed. "My name is Natalie Wilson," she said in English with a heavy accent. "And if you really knew Margaret Johnson, then we have a lot to talk about." Emily felt as if she were about to faint. Natalie Wilson. That name was etched in her memory like a scar that never fully heals. How many nights had she heard Grandma Margaret cry out that name in her nightmares? How many times had she listened to her whisper stories about the employer who had betrayed her in the cruelest way possible? "I don't know what you're talking about," said Emily, but her voice betrayed her lie. Natalie took a step forward, her hands visibly trembling. "Margaret Johnson worked for my family for 15 years. She took care of me from the time I was a child until I became an adult. And then—" Her voice failed her. "And then what?" asked Emily, although she already knew the answer. "Then she stole priceless jewels from my family and disappeared in the middle of the night," completed Richard, his tone now cold and accusatory. Emily felt anger rise in her throat like boiling lava. For years she had heard the real version of that story. She knew very well who the real villains were in that narrative. "Interesting," said Emily, her voice now carrying a coldness that surprised even herself. "And are you sure it was her who stole?" Natalie and Richard exchanged a tense look. There was something in that exchange of glances that confirmed for Emily what Grandma Margaret had always said. They knew the truth. They had always known. Michael, sensing that the tension in the restaurant was reaching dangerous levels, decided to intervene again. "Ma'am, sir, I'm going to have to insist that you continue this conversation in private. My other customers are feeling uncomfortable." "You're right," said Richard, regaining his composure. "Mum, let's go. We can deal with this another time." "No," protested Natalie. "I'm not leaving without answers. Young lady," she turned to Emily, "I need to speak with you. In private." Emily looked around, realizing that all eyes were still fixed on her. Her co-workers watched her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. She knew that, whatever happened, her life at Savannah's finest would never be the same again. "My shift ends at 9, she finally said. "If you want to talk, you can wait for me at the coffee shop on the corner. I'll be there," confirmed Natalie, her eyes still shining with unshakable determination. As mother and son headed for the exit, Emily heard Richard whisper to Natalie in Russian, "Mom, you need to be careful. If that girl really knew Margaret, she might know things that we would prefer to keep secret," Natalie completed bitterly. "Son, some truths cannot be buried forever." Emily pretended not to have heard the conversation, but every word etched itself in her mind. She knew very well which secrets they feared she knew, and they were right to be afraid. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of whispers and curious looks. Her co-workers asked 1,000 questions about how she had learned Russian, why she had never mentioned it before, and if she knew that elegant woman who had caused such a commotion. Emily answered everything with half-truths and forced smiles, but her mind was elsewhere. It was back in the small apartment in Queens, listening to Grandma Margaret tell stories about a wealthy Russian family that had destroyed her life with lies and false accusations. "Emily," Margaret used to say while stroking Emily's hair, "one day the truth will come out. And when it does, you need to be prepared to decide if you want justice or revenge." Now, 15 years later, that moment had arrived, but Emily still didn't know which choice she would make. At 9 o'clock sharp, Emily hung up her apron and headed for the corner coffee shop. She found Natalie sitting alone at a table in the corner, nervously stirring a cup of tea that had clearly gone cold long ago. "Where is your son?" asked Emily, sitting down across from the woman. "Richard is at the hotel." "I thought it would be better if we spoke alone first," replied Natalie, studying Emily's face with the same intensity as before. "And what exactly do you want to talk about?" Natalie took a deep breath before answering. "About Margaret Johnson, about what she told you and about who you really are." Emily kept a neutral expression, though her heart was beating out of rhythm. "I've already said I was her student. There's nothing more to discuss." "That's a lie," said Natalie softly. "You may have learned to speak English perfectly. You may have changed your name and tried to erase your past, but I recognize your eyes. They are the same eyes as the woman I raised as a daughter." Emily felt as if she had been slapped. Natalie knew she had always known. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Emily Johnson," said Natalie, pronouncing each syllable carefully. "That was your name when you were a child. Margaret raised you as if you were her granddaughter, but you both knew there were no blood ties between you." Emily closed her eyes, feeling the defenses she had built over the years crumbling one by one. "How do you know this?" "Because I looked for her for years. I hired investigators, tracked down every possible clue. I knew Margaret had run away with you, but I could never find out where you went." "Why?" asked Emily, her voice laden with bitterness. "To finish the job? To destroy the only person she had left in her life?" Natalie recoiled as if she had been slapped. "No, to ask for forgiveness." Those 3 words left Emily completely speechless. Of all the things she expected to hear, forgiveness was not on the list. "Forgiveness," she repeated, disbelieving. "Yes, forgiveness for not having the courage to confront my father when he falsely accused Margaret. Forgiveness for allowing her to be thrown out of the only home she had ever known. Forgiveness for destroying an innocent woman's life out of cowardice." Emily felt tears burning her eyes, but she fought to keep them under control. "You know she was innocent?" "I always knew," admitted Natalie, her voice breaking. "Margaret would never have stolen anything. She was the most honest person I have ever known, more honest than any member of my own family." "Then why didn't you do anything?" Natalie closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were full of tears. "Because I was young, frightened, and completely dependent on my father. Because I found out the jewels hadn't been stolen. My father had sold them to cover secret gambling debts. Because when I questioned his accusations against Margaret, he threatened to cut all ties with me if I defended a mere maid." Emily absorbed each word, feeling a complex mixture of anger, sadness, and something that might be relief. Finally, after so many years, someone was admitting the truth. "Did Margaret know this?" she asked. "I don't know. I hope not. I hope she believed that I truly thought she was guilty, because if she knew that I knew the truth and still let her be thrown out—" Natalie couldn't finish the sentence. "She knew," said Emily softly. "She always knew that you knew the truth." Natalie let out a sob that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. How did you survive? Where did you go?" Emily looked out the cafe window, watching people rushing by on the sidewalk, each carrying their own secrets, their own shames. "We came to the United States. Margaret knew a Russian family in New York City who helped us at first. She worked as a housekeeper, a cleaner, anything that came up. We lived in a tiny apartment in Queens." "And was she all right?" Emily laughed bitterly. "All right. She had lost everything. Her job, her home, her dignity, her homeland. She had to restart her life at 55 in a foreign country, raising a child who wasn't even her biological daughter. How do you think she felt?" Every word was like a stab to Natalie's heart, but Emily felt she needed to say everything. She needed this woman to understand the true cost of her cowardice. "But do you know what was worse?" Emily continued. "It was seeing how she still spoke of you fondly. Even after everything she had been through, she still said you were a good person who had been manipulated by a cruel father." "She said that?" "Every night, before bed, she would tell me stories about when you were a child, about how sweet and caring you were, about how you used to talk for hours in the garden, about how she considered you more a daughter than a boss." Natalie was crying openly now, not caring about the curious looks from the other cafe patrons. "I also considered her more of a mother than my own mother," she whispered. "When my biological mother died, Margaret was the one who comforted me, who took care of me, who taught me everything about being a woman. And yet you allowed her to be destroyed by a lie." "Yes," admitted Natalie, looking Emily directly in the eye. "And that is a guilt I have carried with me every day for 15 years. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out, now continuing." Emily felt something shift inside her chest. For all these years, she had nurtured a hatred for the Wilson family, especially for Natalie. But now, seeing the genuine pain in the eyes of the woman before her, she began to question whether the revenge she had planned for so long would truly bring the peace she sought. "Where is she now?" Natalie asked hesitantly. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the familiar pang of pain that accompanied that question. "She passed away 3 years ago," she said softly, choosing her words carefully. "Heart problems." Natalie covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I couldn't even ask for her forgiveness," she murmured through her tears. "She knew," said Emily, surprised by her own gentleness. "Before she passed, she told me she hoped you had found peace, that she hoped you had managed to escape the toxic influence of your father." "Escape?" Natalie laughed bitterly. "I only managed to escape when he finally passed 5 years ago, and even then it was too late to correct the mistakes I had made." They remained silent for a few minutes, each lost in her own thoughts. Emily was processing revelations that fundamentally changed her perspective on the events that had shaped her life. "Why are you telling me all this?" she finally asked. "Because I need you to know the truth. Because Margaret deserved for someone to know the truth. And because—" Natalie hesitated. "Because what?" "Because I discovered something a few years ago that makes everything even more terrible." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "What did you discover?" Natalie opened her purse and took out a yellowed envelope, clearly old. With trembling hands, she handed it to Emily. "I found this among my father's papers after he died. It's a letter that Margaret wrote to him 3 days after she was thrown out." Emily took the envelope carefully, as if it were made of crystal. She immediately recognized Grandma Margaret's elegant handwriting on the outside. She tried to explain herself, she asked, opening the envelope carefully. "Read it," Natalie said simply. Emily unfolded the letter, and her hands began to tremble as she read the words written so many years ago. "Mr. Wilson, I know you will not believe me, But I must try one last time. I did not steal your jewels. I would never steal anything from this family that I considered my own for 15 years. But I'm not writing about my innocence, it's about Emily. She is not to blame for what you believe I did. She is just a child who was orphaned and whom I raised as my own granddaughter. Please do not allow my supposed crimes to destroy her future. If you wish to punish me, I am willing to face any consequence. But allow Emily to remain with Natalie. They love each other like sisters, and the girl has no one else in the world. I beg for your mercy, not for me, but for an innocent child. Margaret Johnson. Jessica had to stop reading because the tears were blurring the words. She knew Margaret had tried to protect her until the end, but she had never seen this written proof of the sacrifice she was willing to make. "There's more," said Natalie softly. Jessica turned the page and found an additional note, written in a different handwriting, quicker, more desperate. "P.S. I found the jewels. They are in your secret safe, behind the painting in the library. I know you were forced to sell them because of the debts. I will never tell this to anyone, but I ask again, do not destroy Emily's life because of my supposed crimes. She deserves a future better than anything I can give her." Jessica let the letter fall onto the table, unable to fully process what she had read. Margaret knew. Not only did she know that she hadn't stolen anything, but she also knew exactly where the jewels were and why they had disappeared. "She protected your family until the end," whispered Jessica. "Yes, and in return, my father destroyed her, and I allowed it to happen." Jessica looked at Natalie with new eyes. She saw now not only the woman who had failed to defend Margaret, but also the frightened young woman who had been manipulated by a tyrannical father. "What do you want from me now?" asked Jessica. "Why show me this after so many years?" "Because I want to make amends. Because I want to honor Margaret's memory by doing what I should have done 15 years ago, and because—" Natalie stopped, as if gathering courage to say something very difficult. "Because what?" "Because you have the right to know the whole truth about who you are." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean? I know who I am. I am Jessica Turner, formerly Emily Johnson, raised by Margaret after my biological parents died." "No," said Natalie softly. "You're not." The world around Jessica seemed to stop. The noise of the cafe disappeared, the lights seemed to dim, and all that existed was Natalie's voice and the impossible words she was speaking. "What are you saying? Your biological parents didn't die, Emily, they fled. And the reason they fled is because your father discovered something about my family that could have destroyed us." Jessica felt as if she were falling into a bottomless abyss. Everything she knew about herself, about her origin, about her history, was being rewritten before her eyes. "That's impossible. Margaret told me everything about my parents. They died in an accident when I was 5 years old. Margaret believed that because that's what my father told her. But it wasn't true. Your parents were forced to flee Russia because your father, who worked as an accountant for several wealthy families, including ours, discovered evidence of large-scale money laundering and corruption." Jessica felt as if she were having a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. "You're making this up." "I'm not. I have proof. Documents I found among my father's papers. Correspondence with people he hired to ensure your parents never came back to get you. Why would I stay with Margaret if my parents were alive? Because they believed you were dead. My father told them you had died in the same accident that supposedly killed them. And she told Margaret that your parents had died and that you were an orphan." Emily held onto the table so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She felt as if the world were spinning uncontrollably around her. "My parents, are they alive?" "I don't know," admitted Natalie. "I lost contact with them after they fled. But the last I heard of them, about 10 years ago, they were living somewhere in North America. Emily couldn't breathe properly. 15 years of her life based on a lie. 15 years believing she was an orphan, when in reality her biological parents were alive and probably still suffering from her loss." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I spent years trying to locate your parents to tell them you were alive. Because I want to reunite you. Because it's the only way I know to try to make up for the wrong my family caused." Emily stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair in the process. Several customers in the cafe turned to look, but she didn't care. "I need some air," she said, running for the door. Natalie followed her, catching up to her on the sidewalk outside. "Emily, wait! Don't call me that!" shouted Emily, turning to face her. "You have no right to call me that." "You're right," said Natalie softly. "I'm sorry." Emily paced in circles on the sidewalk, trying to process everything she had heard. Her entire life was a lie. Her identity, her story, her memories, all built on false foundations. "Do you have the proof?" she asked finally. "Those correspondences you mentioned?" "I do. They're at my hotel. I can show you tomorrow if you'd like." "And Richard? Does he know all of this?" "He does. He was the one who encouraged me to look for you and tell you the truth. He always believed our family owed reparations for the injustice we caused." Emily stopped pacing and stared directly at Natalie. "What do you want from me in return? Because people like your family never do anything without expecting something back." Natalie sighed deeply. "I understand your distrust, but we want nothing in return. We only want to try to right the wrongs of the past." "And what if I don't want to find my parents? What if I prefer to keep living as Emily Turner and forget that Emily Johnson ever existed?" "Then we will respect your decision," said Natalie without hesitation. "But at least we want you to have the option to choose." Emily looked at the woman in front of her and saw something she didn't expect to see. Genuine honesty. For the first time since the conversation had begun, she felt that Natalie was telling the complete truth. "I need time to think," she said finally. "Of course. We'll be in New York City for a week. When you're ready to see the proof, or if you want to talk more, call me." Natalie handed her a card with the number of the hotel where she was staying. Emily took the card, but said nothing. "Emily," said Natalie, using her American name for the first time, "I know I have no right to ask this, but I'd like to say one thing." "What?" "Margaret raised you to be an extraordinary woman. Even in the most difficult circumstances, she managed to give you everything you needed to become the strong and compassionate person you are today. That is a testament to her love for you." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes again. "How do you know what kind of person I am? You don't even know me." "I know because I saw how you reacted when you heard me speaking Russian at the restaurant. You could have stayed hidden, pretended you didn't understand, but instead, you came to help me. That says everything about your character." With those words, Natalie walked away, leaving Emily alone on the sidewalk with her confused thoughts and a card that could change her life forever. Emily returned to her small apartment in Astoria in a state of complete shock. The space that had been her refuge in recent years now felt strange, as if it belonged to someone else. And perhaps it really did. She sat on the sofa she had bought from a second-hand furniture store and tried to gather her thoughts. But every time she thought she was beginning to process one revelation, another emerged to confuse everything even more. Her parents were alive. This realization kept hitting her like successive waves. For 15 years, she had dreamed of them, created fantasies about what their lives would have been like if they hadn't died, and now she discovered they never died. They were forced to abandon her. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Jessica, her best friend and co-worker at the restaurant. "Emily, girl, everyone is talking about what happened today. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Emily lied. "It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding? You spoke Russian fluently. How come you never mentioned you knew another language?" Emily realized she would have to create a version of the story to tell people. She couldn't just disappear without explanations. "It's a long story, Jessica. I'll tell you tomorrow, okay?" "Of course, but are you sure you're okay?" "Sure." "Your voice sounds strange." "I'm just tired. It was an intense day." After hanging up, Emily went to the small closet where she kept the few mementos she had brought from her time with Margaret. At the bottom of a shoebox, she found an envelope Margaret had given her shortly before leaving. "Open only when you feel lost and need to remember who you are," Margaret had said. Emily had always interpreted this as philosophical advice. Now she suspected it might be something more literal. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and found a letter in Russian written in Margaret's familiar handwriting. My dear Emily, if you are reading this, it is because something has happened that made you question everything you believed about yourself. Forgive me for not telling you the whole truth when you were younger, but I thought I was protecting you. Your biological parents, David and Catherine Johnson, are wonderful people who have loved you from the moment you were born. They did not die in an accident. They were forced to flee Russia and they believed you had died. I knew this because David was my younger brother. You are my biological niece, not just an orphan I raised out of kindness. You have always been real family. I kept this secret because I feared the Wilsons would discover our family connection and use it against us, but also because I wanted you to grow up without the burden of knowing you were separated from your parents by lies and greed. Inside this box you will find all the information I managed to gather about your parents over the years. The last information I have is that they were living in Canada, in Boston. If you decide to look for them, know that they never stopped loving you. And if you decide not to look for them, know that I will love you forever, regardless of any choice you make. You have always been my greatest blessing. With all my love, Grandma Margaret Emily let the letter fall and rushed to the box. At the bottom, she found a small secret compartment she had never noticed before. Inside it there were dozens of documents, birth certificates, photographs, old addresses, and, most recently, a printout of a web page showing a small bakery in Boston called Johnson Family Bakery. In the page's photo, she immediately recognized the faces of her parents, 15 years older, but unmistakably her biological parents. They were smiling behind the bakery counter, but Emily could see the sadness in their eyes even through the pixelated image. In that moment, everything that had happened during the day finally hit her with full force. She began to cry. Not just tears of sadness, but of relief, anger, confusion, and a faint hope she hadn't felt in years. Their lives had been destroyed by lies, but now, for the first time, there was a chance to rebuild something true from the pieces. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It's a great help to us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, Emily woke up with eyes swollen from crying, but with a determination she hadn't felt in years. She called the hotel where Natalie was staying. I want to see the proof, she said simply when Natalie answered. Of course. Can you come now? I'll be there in an hour. The Landmark Hotel was exactly the kind of place where Emily imagined people like the Wilsons would stay. Luxurious, but not ostentatious. Elegant, without being flashy. Richard opened the door to the suite when Emily knocked. She could see him up close for the first time and noticed he seemed genuinely nervous. Emily, thank you for coming. My mother is anxious to show you the documents. Natalie was sitting in an armchair near the window, with several folders organized on the coffee table in front of her. She looked like she had aged 10 years since the previous night. How are you feeling? She asked as Emily sat down. Confused, but determined to know the whole truth. Natalie nodded and picked up the first folder. I'll show you everything in chronological order so it makes sense. For the next 2 hours, Emily saw her entire life rewritten before her eyes. There were documents showing how Natalie's father had manipulated evidence, correspondence with people he had hired to spread false information about the death of the Johnson family, and even receipts for payments made to ensure that David and Catherine never discovered their daughter was alive. My father was a terrible man, Natalie said, her voice heavy, but I didn't fully understand the extent of his wickedness until he died, and I gained access to his personal papers. Why did he do it? Asked Emily. Why destroy an entire family? Because your father had discovered that my father was embezzling money from several accounts he managed, including charity funds and employee pensions. David had enough evidence to destroy our family and send my father to prison for decades. And instead of facing the consequences, he chose to destroy innocent people. Exactly. And when Margaret started asking too many questions about what had happened to her brother, my father decided she was also a threat. Richard, who had remained silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke. Emily, you need to know that my mother and I have spent the last 5 years trying to track down all the families my grandfather harmed. We want to make reparations to everyone. How many families were affected? From what we've been able to discover so far, at least 12. Some lost their life savings, others were forced to flee the country, and one entire family disappeared without a trace. Emily absorbed this information in silence. Her family hadn't been the only victim. There was a whole web of destruction created by one greedy and cruel man. "What do you want to do about my parents?" she asked. "We want to help you find them if that's what you wish," said Natalie. "I've already hired investigators in Canada. If your parents are indeed the owners of that bakery in Boston, I could have confirmed information in a few days. And then? Then, if you want, we can arrange a reunion. Or, if you prefer, we can simply inform them that you are alive and let them decide how to proceed." Emily looked out the window of the suite, watching the city of New York City move below. Millions of people living their lives, each carrying their own secrets and traumas. "I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." "Of course," said Natalie. "Why are you doing this? What is your real interest in all of this?" Natalie and Richard exchanged a look, and Emily realized there was something they still hadn't told her. "There's something more, isn't there?" Richard sighed. "Yes, there is. Mom, tell her." Natalie seemed to shrink into the armchair. 3 months ago, I received a medical diagnosis that changed my perspective on the time I have left. Emily felt a cold shiver. "What kind of diagnosis?" "It's nothing that will take me away immediately," Natalie said quickly, seeing Emily's expression. "But it made me realize I don't have infinite time to correct the mistakes of the past." "My mother has serious heart problems," explained Richard. "The doctors said that with treatment and lifestyle changes, she can live for many more years, but they also made it clear that the stress and guilt she carries aren't helping at all." Emily studied Natalie's face and saw the truth there. It wasn't manipulation or an attempt to gain sympathy. It was a genuine fear of leaving this world without having made peace with the past. "How old are you?" asked Emily. 71. The same age Margaret would have been if she were still with us. That observation hit Emily like a punch in the stomach. Margaret could still be alive. She could have had 15 more years of life if she hadn't been forced to live in difficult conditions, working beyond her strength to support a child in a strange country. "You know that Margaret died because of what your family did to her," said Emily, her voice heavy with pain. "I know, and that is a guilt I will carry until my last day." Emily stood up and walked to the window. She could see people going in and out of buildings, each with their own problems, their own hopes and fears. "If I agree to this, if I allow you to help me find my parents, what do you expect in return?" "Forgiveness," said Natalie simply. "Not just yours, but theirs too. And perhaps, if it's possible, a chance to get to know the extraordinary woman you've become despite everything our family did." Emily turned to face the two of them. "And what if my parents don't want to forgive you? What if they are so hurt they can't get past what happened?" "Then we will accept that," said Richard, "but at least we will have given you the chance to be reunited." Emily thought of all the nights she had dreamed of this moment, of all the times she had imagined what it would be like to find her parents. But in her dreams, she had never imagined it would be through the people who had destroyed her family in the first place. "I need a few conditions," she said finally. "What are they?" asked Natalie. "First, if my parents don't want to have any contact with you, that has to be respected. You can help me find them, but you can't force a forgiveness they might not be ready to give. We agree completely. Second, I want to know exactly where every single penny of the money your father stole from all those families is. And I want it returned to the heirs, even if that means you have to sell properties or liquidate investments." Richard seemed surprised by this demand, but nodded. "That might take a few years to arrange, but we agree." "And third," Emily took a deep breath, "I want you to help me create something in memory of Margaret, something that honors what she stood for and that helps other people in similar situations." "What kind of thing do you have in mind?" asked Natalie. "I don't know yet, but I want time to think about it." Natalie stood up and approached Emily. "You have our word that we will fulfill all these conditions." Emily looked into the older woman's eyes and saw something she didn't expect. Hope. Not just hope for redemption, but hope that maybe, somehow, something good could come from so much pain. "Then let's begin," said Emily. "Let's find my parents." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of international calls, conversations with investigators, and emotional preparation for what was to come. Emily had asked for a few days off from the restaurant, inventing a family emergency that, ironically, wasn't too far from the truth. On Wednesday, Richard received the call everyone had been waiting for. "They are there," he said, hanging up the phone. "David and Catherine Johnson are indeed the owners of the Johnson family bakery in Boston." The investigator spoke with neighbors who confirmed they have lived there for at least 10 years. Emily felt her heart stop for a moment. Do they know about me?" "The investigator hasn't made direct contact yet. We wanted your authorization first." Emily paced nervously around the hotel suite. For 15 years she had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was so close, she felt terrified. What if they don't recognize me? What if they've built a new life and don't want to be reminded of the past? "Emily," said Natalie softly, "you are their daughter. There is nothing in the world that can erase that love." "Are you sure? Because I don't even remember them clearly. They were just faces in hazy dreams." Richard approached and showed a photo the investigator had sent. This was taken yesterday outside the bakery. Emily looked at the image and felt immediate tears stream down her face. Even 15 years older, even with graying hair and wrinkles that weren't there before, she immediately recognized her parents. "They look sad," she observed. "They lost a daughter," said Natalie. "Of course they are sad." Emily studied every detail of the photo. Her father was carrying a box of bread, and she could see he wore a simple wedding band, the same kind that Margaret had described in her stories. Her mother was sweeping the store's entrance, and there was something in her posture that suggested a permanent weight on her shoulders. "How will we make contact?" asked Emily. "We can do it in several ways," said Richard. "We can have the investigator approach them. We can call directly. Or if you prefer, we can travel to Boston and you can show up in person." The idea of showing up in person was both the most terrifying and the most appealing to Emily. "If I were to go there, would you come with me?" Natalie and Richard exchanged a look. "If you want our company, yes, but perhaps it's better if you meet them alone first. When they find out we are involved, well, they might not react well." Emily knew they were right. Her parents probably had the same opinion about the Wilson family as she had held until a few days ago. "How long would it take to arrange a trip?" "I can have everything ready in 2 days," said Richard. "Tickets, hotel, a visa if necessary." Emily closed her eyes and tried to imagine what it would be like to walk up to the bakery door and see her parents for the first time in 15 years. It would be one of the most important moments of her life. "Let's do it," she said, opening her eyes with determination. "Let's go to Boston." That night, Emily called Jessica to explain that she would need a few more days off. "Emily, what is going on with you? You've been acting very strangely since that day with the Russian woman." Emily had rehearsed this conversation, but it was still hard to know how much to reveal. "Jessica, remember when you asked me about my family, and I always said I had no one?" "I remember." "Well, I found out that might not be true. It seems I might have family I didn't know existed." "Emily! How wonderful! Where are they?" "In Canada. I'm going to travel to try and find them." "And this Russian woman has something to do with it?" Emily hesitated. "Yes, it's a long story, but she gave me information that might lead me to my family." "That's marvelous. When are you coming back?" "I'm not sure. Maybe a week, maybe more." After hanging up, Emily sat on her bed and looked around the small apartment that had been her home for 2 years. If everything went well, her life would change completely. And if it went wrong, well, at least she would know she had tried. On Friday, Emily was at JFK Airport, carrying a small suitcase and a nervousness that seemed to take up all the space in her stomach. Natalie and Richard were with her, but they would travel in different seats and stay at a different hotel. "Remember," said Natalie before they boarded, "you owe us nothing. If at any point you decide you don't want our help, or if your parents ask us to leave their lives, we will respect that completely." "Thank you," said Emily, "for everything." "Don't thank us yet," said Richard. "Thank us when you're hugging your parents." The flight to Boston was an eternity of anxiety and anticipation. Emily couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep, she couldn't concentrate on the movies. All she could do was imagine different scenarios for the meeting that was about to happen. What if her parents didn't believe it was really her? What if they had had other children and she was no longer needed in their lives? What if the pain of losing her had been so great that seeing her again would be more cruel than comforting? When the plane finally landed in Boston, Emily had to hold herself back from running through the airport. In a few hours, she would be face to face with the people she had dreamed of finding all her adult life. The hotel where Emily was staying was only 10 blocks from the Johnson family bakery. She had purposely chosen a nearby place so she could walk there when she felt ready. But now, sitting in her hotel room looking out the window at the Canadian city, Emily felt completely terrified. Her phone rang. It was Natalie. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm going to be sick," admitted Emily. "That's normal. What are you thinking of doing?" "I don't know. I was thinking of going there today, but now I don't know if I have the courage." "There's no hurry," said Natalie kindly. "They've been there for 10 years. They won't disappear if you wait one more day." "What if they reject me?" "Emily, listen to me. You are their daughter. They spent 15 years believing you were dead. There is no scenario in the universe where they would reject you." After hanging up, Emily decided she needed to at least see the bakery before making any decision. She put on a coat and went out to walk the streets of Boston. The city was different from New York City in every way imaginable. Cleaner, more organized, colder, both in climate and in atmosphere. Emily tried to imagine what it had been like for her parents to adapt to this place after leaving everything they knew in Russia. When she turned the corner and saw the sign, Johnson Family Bakery, her heart started beating so hard she was sure everyone on the street could hear it. The bakery was small and cozy, with a window full of breads that looked delicious. There were a few tables outside, even in the chilly weather, and Emily could see movement through the windows. She hid behind a tree across the street and watched. After a few minutes, she saw a woman come out from the back of the shop, carrying a tray of fresh bread. It was her mom. Emily recognized her immediately, despite the 15 years that had passed. Catherine Johnson looked older, with graying hair tied in a simple bun, and she wore an apron dusted with flour. But her movements, the way she tilted her head, the way she smiled at a customer, it was all exactly as Emily remembered from fragments of childhood memories. Tears began to stream down Emily's face without her even realizing it. Her mother was there, alive, real, just 50 meters away. Then, as if she had sensed she was being watched, Catherine looked in Emily's direction. For a moment that seemed to last an eternity. Mother and daughter stared at each other across the street, with Catherine having no idea what she was seeing. Emily panicked and ran back to the hotel. In her room, she called Natalie, sobbing, "I saw her. I saw my mother." "And how was it?" "She's exactly as I remembered, but at the same time completely different. She looks tired, as if she's carrying a very heavy weight." "That's normal. She lost a daughter." "Natalie, I don't know if I can do this. What if seeing me suddenly is too shocking? What if she faints or has a heart attack?" "Emily, breathe. Your parents are resilient people. They've survived terrible things. Seeing you alive will be the best news of their lives." Emily knew Natalie was right, but the fear kept consuming her. She had dreamed of this moment for so long that now that it was here, it seemed too surreal to be true. "Tomorrow," Emily finally said. "Tomorrow I will talk to them." But when tomorrow came, Emily found she still wasn't ready. And the next day, she wasn't ready either. For 3 days, she made the same walk to the bakery, watched her parents from afar, and returned to the hotel without being able to muster the courage to approach. On the 4th morning, Richard appeared at her door. "Emily, may I come in?" She opened the door, knowing she must look terrible. She hadn't slept properly in days and was surviving mostly on coffee and anxiety. "I came here because my mother is worried about you, and because I am too." "I'm fine," Emily lied. "No, you're not, and I know why. You're afraid that this reunion won't be everything you dreamed it would be." Emily sat on the bed and covered her face with her hands. What if they don't know how to react? What if it's too awkward? What if we find out we have nothing in common after so many years? Richard sat in the chair near the window. Can I tell you a story? Emily nodded. When I was 15, my mother told me about Margaret for the first time. She told me how she had been cowardly and allowed an innocent person to be destroyed. And she told me about a little girl who had disappeared along with Margaret. Why did she tell you that? Because I was behaving like a spoiled, cruel boy, exactly like my grandfather. She wanted me to understand the real consequences of cruelty and cowardice. Emily looked at him, seeing him in a new light. And did that change you? Completely. Since then, I've spent my life trying to be the opposite of what my grandfather was. And I spent years thinking about the girl who had disappeared, wondering if she was okay, if she was alive, if we could ever find her and ask for forgiveness. And now that you've found me, now I know that it doesn't matter if this reunion is exactly as you dreamed. What matters is that you get the chance to hug your parents again. The rest, the conversations, the memories, rebuilding the relationship, all of that can come with time. Emily knew he was right. She was letting the fear of imperfection stop her from experiencing something wonderful. Will you come with me? She asked. If you want me to. I do, but I'll go in alone. Of course. Emily took a shower, put on her best dress, a simple blue dress that Margaret had bought for her a few years before, and they walked together to the bakery. Outside, Emily took several deep breaths. Ready? Asked Richard. No, but I'm going to do it anyway. Emily pushed the door of the bakery and a small bell rang announcing her entry. The smell of fresh bread and spices immediately enveloped her, bringing vaguely familiar memories from her childhood. Catherine was behind the counter, arranging some cakes. When she heard the bell, she looked up with a professional smile. Can I help you with any... The words died in her throat when her eyes fixed on Emily's face. Catherine's expression slowly changed from professional courtesy to confusion, then to impossible recognition, and finally, to absolute shock. No, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It can't be. Mom, said Emily softly in Russian, using the word she hadn't spoken in 15 years. Catherine staggered back, holding onto the counter to keep from falling. Her hands trembled violently and tears began to stream down her face. Emily, she whispered, my baby? It's me. Mom, it's me. It was then that David came out from the back of the bakery, carrying a tray of hot bread loaves. When he saw his wife in a state of shock and the young woman across the counter, the tray fell from his hands, scattering bread across the floor. Emily, he said, his voice breaking. Our daughter. Our baby. And then, without anyone saying another word, all three were running toward each other. Emily found herself wrapped in her parents' arms, breathing in their familiar scent, feeling a warmth she had forgotten existed. They cried together for a long time, right there in the middle of the bakery, holding each other as if they would never let go. 15 years of pain, loss, and longing melting away in tears of joy and relief. How, was all David could say when they finally separated enough to look at each other. It's a long story, said Emily, unable to stop smiling even through the tears. We have time, said Catherine, stroking her daughter's face as if she needed to make sure it was real. We have all the time in the world. And so, 15 years after being torn apart by lies and cruelty, the Johnson family was reunited. But this was only the beginning of a much more complex and painful story that still needed to be told. In the days that followed, Emily told her whole story to her parents. She talked about Margaret, about the difficult life in New York City, about how they had survived with dignity despite all the adversity. David and Catherine listened to every word with a mixture of pride, pain, and disbelief. Margaret was always strong, said David, when Emily finished telling how her aunt had worked tirelessly to support them. Even when we were children, she protected all of us. She talked about you every night, said Emily. She told stories about our family, about Russia, about how we were before everything fell apart. It was then that Emily took a deep breath and began the most difficult part of the conversation. There's something else you need to know, about how I found you, about who helped me discover that you were alive. When Emily mentioned the name Wilson, her parents' faces instantly transformed. The joy of the reunion gave way to an expression of pain and anger that Emily had never seen before. "The Wilsons," said David, his voice filled with bitterness. "They are involved in this." Emily explained about Natalie, about the revelations at the restaurant, about all the documents that proved Margaret's innocence and the guilt of the Wilson patriarch. "Natalie wants to make amends," said Emily carefully. "She knows her family destroyed our lives, and she wants to try to repair the damage." "Repair?" Catherine exploded. "How can she repair 15 lost years? How can she repair the fact that Margaret died far from home, working herself to exhaustion to protect us?" Emily understood her parents' anger, but she had also seen the genuine pain in Natalie. "She can't fix the past," Emily said softly, "but perhaps she can help build something better for the future." During the following week, Emily served as an intermediary between her reunited family and the Wilsons. It was a delicate and painful process, full of tears, accusations, and gradually small steps toward understanding. David was the most resistant to forgiveness. For years, he had harbored anger, not only for the injustice done to his family, but for the way they had been forced to abandon their daughter. "They made us believe our baby was dead," he told Emily during one of the most difficult conversations. "We spent 15 years mourning a daughter who was alive. How can I forgive that?" "I'm not asking for forgiveness," said Emily. "I'm asking you to consider the possibility of turning that pain into something useful." It was Catherine who, surprisingly, took the first step. On a cold November afternoon, she agreed to meet with Natalie. The meeting took place at the bakery after hours. Emily watched nervously as two women who had carried the same pain for 15 years faced each other for the first time. "I don't know how to ask forgiveness for something like this," said Natalie, her words filled with genuine humility. "I don't even know if I have the right to try." "You don't," Catherine said coldly, "but Emily says you want to try to do something constructive, so speak." Natalie told the whole truth, about her cowardice, about the years of guilt, about her search to find all the families harmed by her father. She showed documents that proved not only Margaret's innocence, but also the extent of her family's corruption. "I want to create a foundation," Natalie finally said. "A foundation in the name of Margaret Johnson, to help immigrant families who have been harmed by similar injustices." "And you think that erases what was done?" asked Catherine. "No, nothing can erase that. But perhaps it can stop it from happening to other families." David, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Show me the numbers. Show me exactly how much money we're talking about and how it will be used." Over the following months, something extraordinary began to take shape. The Margaret Johnson Foundation became a reality, with offices in Boston, New York City, and Moscow. David, with his accounting experience, became the financial supervisor, ensuring every penny was used properly. Emily returned to the United States with a new mission. She left her job at the restaurant and became the Foundation's American coordinator. Her first initiative was to create a support center for immigrant women in New York City, offering English classes, legal assistance, and emotional support. The center was set up in the same neighborhood where she and Margaret had lived. Emily wanted it to be a symbol of how stories of injustice could be turned into stories of hope. Natalie, surprisingly, moved to New York City to work directly on the project. Her heart problem stabilized, and doctors attributed the improvement to the sense of purpose she had found. "Margaret would be proud of what you've built," Emily told Natalie during the center's opening ceremony 1 year after their first meeting at the restaurant. "Do you really think so?" "I'm sure of it. She always said the greatest victories come when we turn our pain into strength to help others." The opening ceremony was emotional. David and Catherine traveled from Canada to be present. Richard was there with his new wife, whom he had met during the Foundation's work. And there were dozens of women who had already been helped by the center, each with her own story of overcoming. Michael, the former manager of the restaurant, also attended. He had been so impressed with Emily's transformation that he decided to partner with the center, offering internships and culinary training for the beneficiaries. "Who would have thought that confusing day at the restaurant would lead to all this?" he said to Emily. Sometimes, the most difficult moments are seeds for the greatest miracles, she replied. During the ceremony, Emily gave an emotional speech about how an injustice from 15 years ago had turned into a force for good. My Aunt Margaret used to say that we can't control what happens to us, but we can choose what to do with those experiences. Today, we choose to turn pain into hope, injustice into justice, and separation into union. At the end of the event, Natalie approached Emily with something in her hands. "This belonged to your aunt," she said, handing over a small wooden Russian doll. "I found it among the things she left behind when she was expelled. I kept it all these years, hoping for a chance to return it." Emily held the doll carefully, recognizing it immediately. It was the Liberty doll, her favorite childhood toy. "Margaret always said you would keep it for me one day," said Emily, smiling through her tears. "Did she always know we would meet again?" "She knew that true love always finds a way back." As the sun set over New York City, Emily looked around and saw something that 2 years ago seemed impossible. A reunited family, former enemies working together, and a future full of possibilities built on the foundations of forgiveness and redemption. The story that had begun with desperate words in Russian at a fancy restaurant had transformed into something much larger. It had become proof that even the deepest injustices can be transformed into strength to create a better world. 3 years later, the Margaret Johnson Foundation had helped over 1,000 families in 3 countries. Emily married one of the foundation's volunteer lawyers, and they were expecting their first child. David and Catherine had moved to New York City to be near their daughter and future grandchild. Natalie, now 74, continued to work tirelessly at the foundation, her health better than it had been in decades. She had found the peace she had been searching for so long. And in a small cemetery in Queens, a simple headstone with the name Margaret Johnson received fresh flowers every week, left by people whose lives she had touched, even after she was gone. The injustice that should have destroyed a family had, instead, created a network of love and hope that stretched across continents. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of transformation and forgiveness. Do you believe Emily made the right decision by forgiving the Wilson family? Leave your opinion in the comments, and if this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories about overcoming and hope. Thank you so much for your company.